The primary purpose for navigation is to navigate. And I know that seems obvious, but if you really think about the word navigate, it means don't get lost and find your way around. So that's exactly what navigation is going to help the user do. It's going to help you organize information that you want to present. And it's really critical to remember point A to point B. We're helping users navigate across that spectrum. And there can be multiple point A's. There can be multiple user scenarios coming from Twitter, coming from an email campaign, coming from a Facebook ad. You know, there's lots of point A's and their mindset and where they're trying to go. Sometimes you might not even need a navigation in certain scenarios. If you're signing up for something or if you're checking out, a lot of times too many options can create barriers and can create bounce rates to increase. And so the thing that someone is actually trying to do doesn't happen because we have too many options. If you've ever been to a restaurant and you looked at a menu, sometimes when there's just 5 entrees, it makes it a lot easier to pick which one you want. But there's a sushi restaurant in my town, and if you've ever gone to it and looked at the menu, it is completely overwhelming. There's pages and pages and pages and pages of possible options, and it's very overwhelming. And the same exact things happen with navigation. So a lot of times you have to keep in mind, is someone exploring or is someone hunting? If I'm exploring, I want to see all the options. I want to see lists of things. Lots of options might not necessarily be a bad thing, especially if you're designing a larger site. But if you're hunting and there's a very specific task or very specific thing that you want to show a user, a lot of times that requires a special type of design, and it's more of a funnel and a flow, less of just kind of like a all-you-can-eat buffet of navigation. So let's take a look at a quick couple of examples here. All right, I want to start with something simple. So iOS, from the very, very beginning, they have advocated for no more than 5 items in this bottom tab bar. It's close to your thumb. You can access it pretty easily, and it's just the right amount of options to kind of get you where you need to go. And they have also said, you know, if you have more than 5 items, turn this little extra guy over here into like a more icon. And that's kind of exactly what Facebook has done right here. Now, they have, you know, home, watch, groups, notifications, and more. And this could be different if you're looking at this at a different time. Facebook changes their design all the time. And at one point, they even had 6 items down here. They're always experimenting. But since the beginning, it's always been no more than 5. And this has lasted for the last decade. I mean, I think iPhone came out in 2007. And ever since then, this has been a standard, and it's more based on human psychology, less about design, because it requires more information from our brain. It requires more work to make a decision on where we want to go when there's a lot of information. So I think these mobile apps are the perfect example for really trying to hone in on those 4 to 5 most important pieces of information. And this is very much more of a user experience perspective type of problem. This can often be political within the organization. It can be subject to a lot of different people's opinion. This doesn't necessarily go into the visual design of an interface, and we'll get into that. But I want to point it out because this is something that's important for it to be in the back of your mind when you're designing navigation. You know, you need to be involved in why things are here, not just what they look like. So the more deeply you can dig into the why behind the navigation, the better it's going to turn out, because getting the what right is a little bit easier once you know why things should be there in the first place. So let's keep going here. You can see they've got these 4. I don't know if it's for now or just for me personally, but right now these are the 4 most important navigation items. They have their more icon right here, which links to this page. So I've got my profile, I've got a page, couple of pages that I manage, and then all this other stuff. You scroll down, tons and tons of navigation, but they're only showing these top 4 right here, so you can just get to that quickly. So you can see over here with Twitter, we've got a similar kind of 4 tab option here, and they could have put a more tab right here, but instead they chose to put your avatar up here in the top left, and then you tap this thing And then this slides over and you get access to your profile, your list, your topics, your bookmarks, moments. Some of this stuff could arguably not be related to your profile, but they have chosen to kind of put this as content under the ownership of profile. So there's a couple of different ways to do this, but I just want to point out certain patterns that have stood the test of time that are pretty much immutable at this point. Even with Instagram, this is kind of a rare exception where they have an action item in the navigation. This is not going anywhere necessarily. This is actually taking the action to post onto your wall, to make a post. If you've ever used Instagram, you know this already, but there's the 4 main navigation items, and then you've got this 5th action in the middle. Sometimes it's worth, considering putting action in the tab bar, but most of the time it can be debated as to whether or not that actually needs to be in there. Under the profile, now my profile is selected, I still have this little hamburger menu up here that gives me access to all of this stuff. If you were around in like 2011 or so, Facebook introduced their hamburger menu for the first time, and they got away from their grid view that had been in their mobile apps for a long time. They introduced the hamburger menu, and you tap that and it slides out, and you have all your options, basically an endless junk drawer of navigation options. Every single app known to man started copying that pattern. And so there was a huge hamburger menu. You should kill the hamburger menu. Maybe we shouldn't kill the hamburger menu. And so that kind of invaded the mobile space for a while. And it's still become kind of an iconic. There's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with the hamburger menu by itself. But if you use that, just those 3 lines only without showing any other context, it can be a lot more difficult to find the navigation items. And there's a great study from Luke Wroblewski about navigation items being shown versus hidden. But a lot of that is very contextual to the app, but I will link you up to that study below. Okay, so beyond iOS, I want to take you to a relatively simple website that I designed. This is probably back in 2013 or so. I want to point out kind of a simple navigation here, and then how this transitions from wide desktop down into like a mobile menu. Most of all of these, web-based menus, they're going to have these different states. They're going to have the default state, and then some type of hover state, and they're gonna have an active state, which is what you're seeing right here. And then sometimes you might even have a pressed state, which shows, what happens after you press it. So in this particular example, this is my default, this is my hover, and this is what it looks like on an active page. And on the actual live site, you got your hand that comes up, you click this, and it's gonna eventually load into that active state. And this is a sticky navigation. You don't necessarily have to have your navigation be sticky. You can make that decision while you're developing, but it's also worth considering whether or not your navigation is sticky or not on the web. Sometimes it can be easier to actually create hover effects on the web with actual code. And it'll require a little bit of CSS, but really it's this anchor tag, and then there's the hover tag, which kind of tells everything what to do. So I'll link this as well if you want to experiment. A lot of times I don't actually design a full complete hover state until I can get it into a prototype. Sometimes I'll just leave default, maybe an active, but I like to save a little bit of the interactivity for the very end. That way, when it comes a little bit closer time, sometimes I'm trying to work out the motion and the interactivity after I've kind of designed a lot more. I don't want to lock myself in too quickly on interaction tidbits. A lot of that stuff for me comes later. There's nothing wrong with having an idea and testing it out while you're working on your designs. But as long as you have like a default state and an active state, and they're different enough, then I think that's good enough to keep going through the rest of the project, and then sometimes figure out some of that interactive stuff later. Okay, now let's take a look at this BabySense website that I made some wireframes for. I've got the mobile view, and I've got the kind of iPad view, and then I've also got the large kind of desktop view. And this is one of those sites that is quite intensive in terms of sections and departments. There's a lot going on, and there's not really an easy way to just put in all the navigation. I actually flew to New York and had several 2-day sessions with the client, and we're whiteboarding and we're drawing stuff and we're chatting and we're trying to come up with every section and every topic that's going to be inside this website. I didn't design any of these navigation items on this site until I had some type of content map and structure that I could go from. This entire categorization of all of these different things, all these static pages, all of the user data, like saved emails, all of this stuff was a result of a sit-down whiteboarding session. And I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole on this whole product side of things, but I just want to point out that there's a lot of work that goes into deciding what the navigation is actually even going to be. So I show those other examples as some simpler concepts, whereas this one has a lot more going on. There's kind of this account related info up here. You've also got like profile related things. And then you have all these departments, you have the ability to search, and there's some websites that get more complex than this. And we're also trying to head off like, okay, if you have a kid on this website and you've registered your kid and you want to find stuff for that kid, what if you add more kids? So then we even have to consider like, okay, well, if you only have one kid, just link to that one shop. But then if you've added more kids, then we're going to show this little modal if you click this, and then you can go to individual kids' shops. So lots of little tiny details that go into trying to figure out even just this navigation. And then you also need to figure out like, how is this going to collapse? Well, a lot of times you can imagine your big navigation here. This is all kind of profile related. This is my profile, who I'm following, my saved searches, my list, account, shop, and this is all related to me. This is stuff that I have created. Whereas all of this down here, this is everything that BabySense is offering. And so if you break this up into two separate lists, then you end up with something like this over here down in the very bottom. So you can see basically all of this stuff here is now in a vertical list here. And then all of this stuff is in a vertical list right here. So you can condense these horizontal things into a vertical list when you're dealing with responsive. Now we have these two entryways that will pop open these modals. So now I've got, this is me, this is Sam is my user, and this is what happens if you tap that little profile area. I have access to all of this stuff right here. And then for menu, if I tap menu, all of those top picks, gear and travel, all of that stuff comes out. It's going to be really difficult to design a navigation for a site like this unless you've done that hard work or someone on the team has architected the information in a way that makes sense. And you as the designer can say, yes, that makes sense. I'm going to design for that now. So just again, be aware of what kind of goes into a big navigation like this. And if you're working with a client or your team, have those discussions about what makes sense and get that information in place before you start trying to fiddle with colors and hit states and active states and hover states and all of that. And there's also going to be unauthenticated navigation where there's the ability to sign up, but no one has signed up yet. So the navigation is going to look a little bit differently. So we're asking for your email. We're telling you that you can log in. We're telling you can sign up, and you can still get to the menu there. So like we're replacing the profile stuff with some of the ability to actually sign up for the website. And this is all wireframe. This is just black and white, grayscale. It's a lot easier, at least from my point of view, to design stuff like this in a wireframe stage. I'm still considering line height. I want my padding to be nice. I want these lines to be consistent. I'm going to use good icons, all of that. But I'm not going to worry about custom typography and coming up with really cool fonts. I just want to do the bare minimum of good design and then move into some more final designs. Once I had all of that wireframed out, then I felt comfortable moving into the actual visual design. Now that I've got the wireframes, you can see that I'm kind of, this is the smaller text, and I'm using like 14-point font up here for the smaller stuff. And then for the larger stuff, I'm using 16-point, which is more kind of like body copy size. So basically when I'm designing this, I designed this kind of separately from everything else and then started laying out everything else. And then you can see, I've got, all right, first name, got the menu, And then we've got this popping out here, and so on and so forth. So I just want to reiterate that it takes a lot of mind power to come up with what's going to be in the navigation in the first place. I've had, multiple meetings with clients to talk about just what the navigation structure is going to be. So it really depends on the project as to whether you can just take 5 items and start designing with those. On simpler projects, that can happen. But on larger projects, if you're ever dealing with that, definitely spend a little bit of time talking to whoever's making those decisions about what needs to go in there in the first place, because those questions and problems can ultimately tee you up for a better visual design to begin with. Typically, I like to try to limit it to just 5 items, the same way that the iOS only gives you 5 spots for your navigation. I like to try to think of the top 5 things that need to go there. And if there might be like 8, 9, 10, I might just stick some of those less important information into like a little more button, like more ... So you might have about, features, pricing, whatever, more, or maybe like resources. Think of those names of categories that you could lump things into and then create a little drop-down menu out of it. Because you can always make a vertical list, just one row after the other for like a mobile layout, whether it's like a more page on a mobile app, or it's like a menu on, you tap the menu button and you have all of those horizontal pieces laid out for all of your designs. Another really good thing to consider is the usage of nouns versus verbs, or words ending in ing, or words that are plural versus singular. Think about the copy that goes into the navigation. Are you going to say about us, contact us, our case studies, or are you going to say about, or contact, or features? Think about those words and think about what that looks like visually when you're designing the navigation. That way, when you get into the colors, maybe you're using grayscale and your hover is a color and your active state is black, it's going to look better if you have those succinct copywritten words. So I would encourage you, don't just wait for someone to make those decisions for you. Start thinking about what looks better. Sometimes it's going to be better to have 2 words. Every button, every navigation item is going to be 2 words. Sometimes you're not going to be able to make that work. And other times you might have to just settle for what somebody tells you what to do. It just depends. But I would always inquire about the usage of that language and make suggestions, even if that wasn't necessarily your job to do. Okay, I've got another example I want to bring up again. Because this is an example of a project where we wanted to present this information really so people could pay their internet bill. They're going to use this portal to pay their bill, possibly do some upgrades and check the status. And that's really it. There wasn't a lot of other things that we wanted them to really be able to do other than pay and fix payment issues. So we don't have a big navigation that people can just go all out. So we're using basically more of a flat style of listing all of this content out. And we are using a variation of the hamburger menu. In a lot of cases, this is not really going to work. This was unique because this was like designed for the hunter, not necessarily the explorer. And then when you activate this little menu button, I've got the designs for that up here. We're using that same 32-point font and just trying to create like a nice consistent theme with some of those larger type sizes. So like home is going to bring you back here. Services, that will take you to, some of these services that you can upgrade. Billing, Wi-Fi, all of those sections are down here. And you can see that I'm kind of modifying the look and feel of that hamburger button depending on whether I'm on the home page or the interior page. And there's no big rule that says this has to be exactly in the same spot. But looking back on this, I should have chosen to kind of put these two side by side. Possibly something like just another little study where maybe I was bringing this stuff down, bringing this navigation kind of in the same spot. I think in practice, it's probably a good idea to have that hamburger menu in roughly the same spot. Because if someone's scrolling through the website and they're used to tapping this to open up the navigation, and then all of a sudden it's in a different spot, it's going to be a little bit weird. So that's probably something that I could have improved on this design. But I also want to point out that this was just kind of like a little web app And on the larger versions, it was really just going to be a very simple little status type page. We weren't going to do this huge design. So I left the menu kind of the same way. Instead of listing out home, services, billing, we left that there. Some of these new screens, it is definitely in the same place. I think that mobile one was just more of an oversight on my part. And then showing what that menu is going to look like, bringing it down here. So I'm actually bringing in the close button in the exact same position as menu. Because you imagine if you tap menu and the thing slides over, you're going to want to tap in the exact same spot to kind of just keep that interaction a little bit more consistent. So if you are going to do a slide out menu, make it easy for someone to dismiss it by keeping the menu and the close button kind of in the same spot. So there's lots of different options for top menus, side menus, flying out menus, drop down menus. It really just depends on the nature of your project. But I think most importantly is just to really figure out why things are there and then to make sure all of your states are covered. Your default state, your hover state, your active state, if you're going to do a press state or not. And sometimes you might need to prototype those. And also remember, with the exception of the Instagram app, the navigation is really meant for a user to go somewhere. And actions are meant for a user to do something. So in the Instagram example, that plus sign in the middle is definitely an action to post a picture, whereas everything else is going somewhere. So just think about your navigation as this is going somewhere and all of your actions are actually doing something. So for homework, I'm going to give you 3 different options to choose from. You can pick one of these if you like, or you can go all out and do all 3. So first of all, I want you to design a mobile app, like a shell, just like the navigation only. You don't have to do much content. I'm going to list everything out down below so you can have that information to design with. But basically, while you're designing this, just create like a shell and focus really, really heavily on where are you gonna put everything in the bottom, or are you gonna have a couple of items in the top left and top right to go side to side? And if you do go side to side, you also need to kind of show how do you get back? Is it gonna slide over and have a navigation to go back? Or are you gonna have a close button because it pops up? So I want you to kind of think about the interaction a little bit more in addition to the way it looks. And as a second option, let's go with like a marketing website for a software as a service company. And you'll have like a fictitious name and an optional logo if you want to design that. But again, we're just gonna design the top header navigation really only. You can put content in there if you want, but I think it'd be easier to focus on just the nav and show what it looks like with those 5 items listed out. And with the call to action, like sign up and log in, maybe off to the right. But then show what that looks like on a mobile screen listed out vertically in a single row. And how are you gonna position the call to action with some of the other stuff? So think about some of that interactivity between the responsive screens. And then for the third option, this is gonna be like your mega navigation, your mega corp. Come up with a fictitious name for a big corporation. If you want to go all out and make a fictitious logo, that would be cool too. But we're going to have like a top tier nav of smaller items, and then a primary navigation of 5 items or so, and then a third navigation and each one of them are kind of like a parent and sibling relationship with all of them. So I'm going to list all of that stuff down below. Kind of some different options for you to go through. I think it would be fantastic if you did all 3, but I understand if you only go for one, no big deal. But take a look at the homework assignments below, and I can't wait to see what you come up with.